There are two different types of CNC dust boots that you're going to be using on your hobbyist CNC machine. The first is going to actually clamp onto your Z-axis and is going to travel up and down as your machine is making cuts. The second is going to clamp onto the machine itself and is going to float above the material where the Z-axis plunges in and out of it. Both of these have huge pros and cons, and unfortunately neither of them are the long-term solution that I'm looking for my CNC. Sadly, that option does not exist, so I've set up an entire test simulation on my CNC so that we can see the pros and cons of each of them. But before we get into that, we really need to talk about the dust collector itself. I added up over the last 10 years of my woodworking, and I've spent over $11,000 on dust collectors, hoses, pipes, fittings, extractors, all that kind of stuff, and I was astounded. I personally only thought that I've spent like $4,000 or $5,000, but yeah, it was double. I completely understand what it means to start off bare bones basics cheap. You buy a shop vac, and then all of a sudden you realize how quickly the filters start clogging up, so you start looking into other options. You go buy a single stage dust collector, maybe the kind with the bags. Maybe you move up to double, and then something like a cyclonic separator. This one from Grizzly specific is something that I used in my shop for such a long time, and I was never happy with it. Truth be told, I haven't been 100% happy with any of the dust collectors that I've used. Back there you can see that is Jet's flagship 3 horsepower cyclonic dust collector, and unfortunately it is not the solution that I need for my CNC machine. Currently I'm using my Festool dust extractor. That thing performs really well in certain circumstances, especially when I'm using my ripsaw and my domino. That dust extractor is perfect for those situations. It is purpose built for installers to be able to take that into people's homes and use it on single tools as they're doing jobs. It is not the best solution for my CNC. So I reached out to Oneida Air and I said, hey, I've got some issues. I think I need one of your huge wall dust collectors. They said, hold on there, Hamilton. Let's talk about what you actually need this thing to do. I really was kind of shocked to find out that I needed a much smaller unit. They have just come out with a Supercell Turbo. Not only will it collect out of 5-inch dust ports, but it'll also go all the way down to a 1-inch dust port, supplying the exact same amount of suction. Now, I am by no means qualified to explain how they did this, but essentially they took a bunch of these dust extractors and they took all the motors and they shoved it down into one convenient package. The really nice part is you can have it on a roller unit just like the one that I have. You can also mount it to the wall. There's a bunch of different configurations, and without reservation I can say that it is completely different than anything that else I've had. I cannot sing enough praises about this unit, and that's why I've taken so long on it. Yes, Oneida did send this over to me for free, and yes, I am incredibly happy with that. But the truth is, if you're looking for a one and done dust collector in your shop, I would highly consider this. They do make a 110 unit called the Dust Cobra, and you can use it as a pass-through for your CNC machine. So if you're interested in those specific dust collectors, I'll have links down in the description. But you're here to see the testing that I've done with both of these styles of dust boots. And spoiler alert, both of them work incredibly well, and a lot of that is due to the fact that I have the best dust collector possible for this situation. But there are still some pros and cons, and let's go ahead and hit those. I went ahead and whipped this up in Carveco Maker Plus. If you're interested in that software specifically, I'll have some links down below. And if you really want this file to assign your own toolpaths and test out your dust solution that you have in your shop, I'll have that for free on cnclater.com. Now on this first cut, we are actually just cutting out the test so we can see what we're doing. And I used 0 dust collection so you can see exactly how much dust is being kicked up. This material is MDF, and I just painted the top black so that you can see the dust a little bit better about what's really being kicked up. And my specific spindle is a water-cooled spindle, which means that it is not pushing air down, so the dust is not really getting that airborne. Any type of movement is because of the router bit itself. Speaking of router bits, I'm only going to be using 2 during this test. A 60-degree groovy Jenny, and then the second is going to be our 1/4-inch downtown Jenny. Over here on the far left, we are going to be using the Nighthawk that was very kindly provided to me. You can check out this exact dust boot down in the description below. And in the very middle, there's going to be our control. We're showing exactly how much dust happens without any type of dust collection at all. And then over here we're going to be using PWN CNC's floating dust collector that hooks onto the arms, remarkably similar to the solution that Oneida has on their website. Now the Suck It dust boot made by Oneida is what I was using entirely on my other CNC, and it has been fine. It's done what I've needed to do. The issues that I've had with the dust collection have been the hose that I was using as well as the extractor that I was using. So it's fine. You've seen it a ton on this channel, so I wanted to go ahead and show something else off. the PWN system, but it also has some pros over the socket and some cons as well. We'll get into all that. So for the PWN CNC Dust Boot, you can see here, I've lowered it as much as it'll go, and I think I've just got the wrong support arms for it. But the really nice part is with the Oneida system that it really doesn't matter because you're getting so much suction. It worked fantastic, as you would assume. Next, we're looking at the Nighthawk, the one that actually clamps onto the Z-axis and moves along with it. And this is my very first cut with this dust boot, so I'm still trying to figure out the exact spacing of where to clamp it onto the spindle. And I've noticed that you do have to actually change that height of where you clamp it on depending on the bit that you're using. That is one of my reservations about this system because there are some pros, but like I said, we'll get into that in a little bit. Next, we are going to be showing the control. This is going to be exactly how much dust is kicked up just from pocketing. Now, pocketing is where the Nighthawk is really going to shine because it's going to be able to go down with the bit and it's going to be able to provide dust collection exactly where the bit is. And normally that is where the floating solution is really not going to shine as much because it is floating on top of the surface that you've set the Z height at. Now, when the bit is going down and it's cutting out all this material down here, it's got a very good chance of kicking that dust out into an area that the dust boot really can't get to. Now, that is very important if you're using like a shop vac or something, but like I said, with the Supercell Turbo, that really doesn't matter. So both of these dust boots did really, really well on the pocketing, and last but not least, we did some profile cutting. Now for both of these, I started cutting before the collector was on just to show you how much dust was being generated, and then turned it on. For the Nighthawk, it just contains the dust a little bit better, but unfortunately, like I have said earlier, for the PWN CNC one, my support arms weren't long enough, so it unfortunately did push out the dust and wasn't able to pick that up, whereas the Nighthawk is all the way down on the material and it was able to contain that dust as it was cutting. They both work really well, as you would expect when you have the very nicest dust collector available to woodworkers today, paired with two incredibly well-designed dust boots. You get good results. Let's just go ahead and talk about the pros of each. The clamp on, the suction's always at the bit. That is such a nice part. It is going to be moving along with it. Therefore, when you're creating pockets or cavities, it's not going to be shooting dust out the side. That's a huge, huge pro. And then the PWN ride-along unit, it has a very low risk of crashing. As the router is plunging in and out and the dust boot is remaining static, the dust boot isn't moving around, so it's not going to have as big of an opportunity to crash into the material. The only reservation about that specifically is if you're doing very deep profile cutting, there's a possibility that your router or spindle could go too far down into that dust boot and cut it, interact with it, push it. That is a possibility. The con for the Nighthawk is that you have to clamp it directly onto the spindle unit itself. Specifically for my CNC, I don't know about others, but there's not a ton of clearance behind the spindle and then the Z-axis itself. So the material has to be very thin on that dust boot. So if that dust boot is not at a complete 90-degree angle to the spindle, it could kick out the bottom portion of that dust boot. So as the Z-axis is traveling up and down, it could hit it and then knock things off. Now, I did point out that that material needs to be thin. The Nighthawk uses Lexan, which is an incredible material. It's not going to shatter if it does interact with the bit. It's just going to cut. And you can see here that you can abuse this thing. It's not going to break very easily. The main use of that clear stuff is just to see if there's any blockages. So if you're buying it because you just want to see the dust go through, I guess there's some validity to it because if for some reason you do have a very large blockage, you'll be able to see that. And when talking about blockages, that is where I personally think that the ride-along units have a little bit of trouble. They have to be so thin in their design that if you're cutting something that produces very long strands on your CNC, there's a possibility that it's going to get all gummed up in that, especially if you're not using the right collector. So I had that Festal unit as a CT36, I believe, and there were times where I was cutting out stuff on my CNC where it was getting jammed up in the actual boot itself, and it was mid-carve and I didn't notice, and then it ended up going pretty poorly. Oftentimes when you're putting on hoses onto these things, it's adding weight. And these hoses that come over the very front, as it is moving, it's interacting with your spindle or your router as that's moving up and down, and that's causing strain on the hose, which can in turn pull up the unit that you have attached to your CNC. That's where I felt that the PWN unit was really great because it sent the chips out the very back of the machine. That was my favorite part about it, is that I wasn't having to have a hose come over the very front of the unit that was interacting with a moving part. it was going behind and it was at a static location, as it is a static dust boot. I'm sure they have better solutions for their arms that I either couldn't find in what they sent me, or who knows. I personally am going to be using the one that actually mounts onto the Z-axis, the Nighthawk unit. And that's not because I think that it is the best solution out there. It's because I think it is the best solution that I currently have in my shop. I feel like I've got a ton of use and understanding when it concerns the units that float above the material with the Suck-It dust boot. So I really want to know a lot more about the clamp-on options, which is why I'm going to be using the Nighthawk moving forward. One of the drawbacks that I have for the Nighthawk is that I no longer am able to use my light. Now, that's just one of the things that I would like to see in a future design. I would really like to see something that reliably clamped on to the spindle, something that I wasn't afraid about it being perfectly 90 degrees, something that magnetically just attached, because both of these solutions have magnetic portions to them, which I think is super awesome because it's able to help you really quickly change out bits. The really nice part about the Suck-It solution, Huntington Builds created these little quick change units for it, as well as a place to actually put the dust boot that mounts onto the machine itself, because as somebody who creates content, there are times that I need to be able to show the machine actually cutting, because when you have a CNC dust boot in the way, it really takes away the understanding of what's happening with the CNC machine. So instead of uninstalling it every single time, it's really nice to be able to take that away and put it somewhere on the CNC that you know is a really stable position. And stability is the main thing that I'm looking for. I want to be able to store it, but I also want to be able to install it onto the CNC and know that it's not moving around. So here's a list of what I would really like to see on my perfect dust boot. I would like for there to be a hard fixture on the CNC itself. That hard fixture including a light ring. So I can take the inner working unit off and I can store that on top of the CNC as it's running, but I still have the light to be able to show the bit actually cutting. But then when I need dust collection, I could come and I could install that. I don't know how that works when you're talking about cutting very deep material, so I'm assuming longer bristles could really solve that for me. The issue is when you install longer bristles and then you have very short material, those bristles can be pushed in with the dust collector and then cut up in your CNC bit as it's running. So I understand. This is why there isn't a perfect solution. There's so many variables, there's so many different types of CNC machines, there's so many different things that creators are actually cutting on their CNC machines, so there's no perfect solution, unfortunately, right now. Thankfully, there is a perfect solution for your dust collecting when it concerns your CNC router, and I personally believe that is the Supercell Turbo. Once again, super thankful for Oneida for sending that over. So if you're brand new to the channel, this is when I talk about how long it actually took me to make this video itself. Yes, with the filming, with the editing, all of it together, that is the number for this video. And at the very end of the year, I'm going to add up all of my videos together so I can figure out my hourly rate when it concerns this YouTube channel with Google AdSense and how much the channel actually made. The next video that y'all should see from the channel is going to be my spring market results. And spoiler alert, I tried my absolute worst when it concerns selling and I still profited. So I'm really excited about showing y'all that video. And then the video after that, I have been working on for, when it goes live, it's going to be like 26, 28 weeks. Hopefully it'll turn out half as good as what I think it's going to be. Thanks for sticking around, and I will see y'all later. Bye.